Hey,
Okay.
it's been a little while.
A few years.
Yeah. So we've talked over Zoom and email a lot, but the last time we met in person was at the Books A Million in outside DC. In
Anne Arundel Mills.
Arundel Mills.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The line was out the door of the mall and around the corner. Remember, we parked the car and like, what are all these people doing here? And it's like, oh my God. Okay.
How did it begin for both of you? Like, what's the inroads to audiobook narration?
Do you mean how did we start our careers?
Yeah,
Or how
how'd
did
you start
the
your
Wheel
careers?
of Time begin?
Oh, both. I want to hear how you
Okay.
got the Wheel of Time
So,
too.
how did we start our careers? Basically comes down to a man named Grover Gardner, who's
Okay.
a DC theater friend of ours,
Uh-huh.
and who's responsible for getting a lot of people into audiobooks. He's a magnificent narrator. And he told me, my side gig when I was doing theater was waiting tables. And he said, you should apply for a job at the Library of Congress Talking Books program. It might be more fun. So I was like, oh, okay. And so I engineered other narrators for a year.
Okay.
Before I started narrating.
Uh-huh.
And that was my grad school. That was my study. How does everybody do everything before I began narrating? Simultaneously.
I was with Grover, and he needed an engineer for his non-Library of Congress stuff. I ended up being the engineer for 4 or 5 other narrators for 5 years before I ever got to the other side of the microphone.
Before you even started.
Before I even started.
You both have amazing voices and are iconic in the industry, and you both started on other people's engineering or facilitating first.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's great training
Yeah.
because you're listening. What works? What doesn't work? And it was just a variety of material that you got to see and work on, so you could learn about. Okay, this is how you might do a 1920s piece. This is how you might do a classic, because one of the authors or one of the narrators that we worked with did classics from the late 18th century, late 19th century, and so different styles of prose that you were exposed to, and then that same narrator ran the studio, and she saw me in a play and said, "You need to be on the other side of the microphone. Send in an audition." And
I am big Wheel of Time fan, obviously, and it was the 7th or 8th one that I checked out from the library for the first time. Back then, audiobooks, I never bought one.
Right.
They were like, I was a college student, and they were like $100.
Yeah.
You'd see them on the shelf at Barnes & Noble, you'd be like, who could even afford this? But I check them out from the library. And going on a road trip, I'm like, I'll listen to one of them instead. And that's where I discovered you. And then I actually went back and started listening to all of them on audiobook because I enjoyed them so much with the performances that you gave. To the point that those, you know this, but the viewer might not. When Tor came to me and said, they didn't ask me on Elantris, but on a Mistborn they said, who do you want to narrate it? I said, I want Michael and Kate. And I think they only got Michael.
right.
And then I put my foot down when it was Way of Kings, and I said, I want Michael and Kate. And then they went and finally got you both. So I knew you from that, and I asked for you by name because I had loved them so much. How did the Wheel of Time end up in your laps?
Well, Robert Jordan was the first major author to want 2 people to narrate, 2 different voices, male and a female. And the technology, as I said, was reel-to-reel tape, and they weren't editing. So it wasn't like you could just cut and paste a piece in. And so they needed a team that could work closely together. And they sent us the first 5 books. I sent 10 because at that point we still needed to have an engineer outside of the booth to work on.
Okay, so they said 2 copies of each of the first 5. Yeah.
And we had a studio in our house. And it was literally, I would read my section and then pop out the door, hand slap, and she would go in and read her section.
And tag team.
Tag teamed. But I think a lot of it had to do with some of the stuff that we had both done for books on tape before. They were like, okay, this is something that they can do, and we need a team that is in proximity to each other, because at that point it's like, especially when you get to those ending chapters where you're changing points of view every 3 pages, that would have been crazy to try to do. So that's kind of how we ended up starting it.
One of the things I loved when I was on tour for the Wheel of Time, I've forgotten a bunch of these nuances in the 10 years since, but I could tell who was an audiobook reader by how they pronounced the character names. Because Robert Jordan, like, I still to this day don't know how Robert Jordan pronounced some of them, because Harriet, his wife, and Maria, his assistant, would argue over which pronunciation was right on those. And the fans would all argue, and Robert Jordan had his ways, but then the fans would say, no, he said it this way, and others say, I heard him say this way. So it's all kind of oral history by now, but the audiobook pronunciations are like, you know, standard for that audience, and they'd come up and they'd say a character, I'm like, you're one of my audiobook buddies. Yeah.
And it was cool because the whole time we were recording that series, which took us 20 years, the technology was changing.
Let's talk about that.
As we were working on the books. So we're starting out with either reel-to-reel or ADAT tape. Either way, it was physical tape. The ADAT machine was a truly frightening thing because you took a VHS tape and you formatted it into 8 tracks and you ran it through the machine, stopping and starting and stopping and starting for 8 tracks. And if it ate your tape at the end of the 8th track,
you're done.
Your work was gone. There was no way of I have been crying and praying and taking a pencil to or tweezers to hope that I can extract the tape from the maw of this horrible machine. So and then there was a brief flirtation with DAT tape, which was even more stupid.
No, DAT was between reel-to-reel and
ADAT. And then did we go from ADAT to
the
computer?
Hard drive.
And that was a revelation. Then all of a sudden it was like, what do you mean? Everything's saved? Even if I really mess up and I hit delete, it's there somewhere?
Right,
That was incredible.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. In the beginning, when we were working on tape, we would actually have to burn CDs from the tape and FedEx them to California.
Yeah.
And now it's like, send.
We kind of have a question, because this is our first time being in Utah.
Flying from Denver to Salt Lake City, and I am a window seat plane rider, and I take lots of photographs, even if they're really fuzzy, because I'm just so fascinated by the experience of that bird's eye view of the topography. The scenery is unlike anywhere I've ever been, and I've seen a bunch, but this is particular. And there are some very shockingly abrupt shifts.
Yes, there are.
And some of those mountain formations are what I would call kind of aggressive.
Yep.
Even though they're not moving, I feel like they're about to punch me in the face. And I'm wondering how much of this incredible landscape informs your imagination when it comes to creating the world that your characters live in.
So Stormlight Archive is directly inspired by the landscape here. I grew up in Nebraska, flat, right?
Okay,
There was a cornfield behind my house. I know it's
Southwest Minnesota.
Yep.
At night, I could see a town, the lights 60 miles away.
Yeah, exactly the same. And I'm not the son of a farmer, right? My mom's an accountant, my dad's a businessman, but there's not a lot there. I love the place, the people are wonderful, but visually there's nothing. And so I came out here to college, and the mountains were stunning. And in college, my roommate was a man named Micah DeMoe. I named a character Captain DeMoe after him, and he's a photographer. He was doing his MFA in photography, and his specialty was nature photography. And so he needed a lovely assistant, as he would call them, to hold the little light shield, whatever you call it, to shine the light in the right way, to help him pack equipment. And he talked me into it. Me, who likes to sit in my basement in the dark and tell stories. And he drugged me all around Utah to all of the sites, all the vistas, through all the slot canyons and all of these things. And I would be sitting there holding the light thing to try and get the perfect shot, or helping him with the light meter while he's, all of these things, so that he could set up these brilliant photography sessions, capturing the nature and the vistas. And that's what he really liked, was the vistas. And so it's during those years that the Stormlight Archive really started to come together. The first ideas were back when I was a teenager, and those were all character ideas. The world developed during those sessions in the late 90s, traveling around and seeing everything. So let's get back to audiobooks. How have they changed? So you've gotten to computers. How have audiobooks and how people use them, in your perspective, from your side, how's it changed over the years?
I mean, it's an ancient thing, right? Telling a story. So I don't think audiobooks are any different. The technology has changed, but I think what narrators do is you read a book.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's really interesting that your art and my art, it's like you're the performance art version of what I'm doing. I always say to my fans that I don't feel a book is finished till it's read, because you add so much to it. I may be complete 80% and they do 20, but you add like another 10, right? Which is really interesting to me. Have you seen any changes in the popularity of audiobooks? Has that influenced you?
Oh, it's huge. The technology changed just in terms of, back in the day when you were taking from the library, there were only limited numbers of copies of the book. So if you took that book out from the library, chances are that was the only copy that they had. So if somebody's wanting that book, they're going to wait till you bring it back in, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever that is. Can you imagine what would happen if Wind and Truth comes out and there's 150 copies. Okay, we'll put you down. We think we have an opening in November of 2027. Yeah, if you're good with that, then we'll ship it to you. So the idea that it can be anywhere and instantly. It's
and affordable.
And affordable.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and this has come from a number of fans, the way audiobooks are used in the sense of, I want to call them repeat users, so to speak. It's their comfort place. So for them, especially in these longer stories, which have, 40, 50 hours, by the time you end it, you're like, you can go back to the beginning because you've forgotten some of the details. But more than that, it's like, this is my place to go to feel safe. And we've found that there are a lot of people who use audiobooks to kind of create that safe place for them. It's a way to I don't need to be anxious. I can be calm. I can go to sleep. That's one of the things that's always kind of funny. It's like, you put me to sleep.
Every night.
And we're like, okay, I guess I take that as a compliment.
Take it as a compliment. I've been told it before as well. So, though it is interesting, we were talking earlier, I feel like you're my friends because I've listened to you read to me so much. This parasocial relationship is what they call it. It's got to have changed because I've watched audiobooks going from selling 500 copies out of my my repertoire to these days where audiobooks almost 50% of my sales, and I have non-insignificant sales, right? To where almost the majority of people listening are reading the book are experiencing it through your voices. Which is fascinating to me. So I think we should turn this just to a little bit more on the process. They're probably really interested in that. Like when you sit down to record an audiobook today, what is it like? What's the process? How do you go about it? How do you make the audiobook?
It sounds ridiculously simple. You read the book, you look up anything you don't know, and then you go sit in a box and you read it out loud.
And is there an engineer there with you, a producer with you?
No. We self-direct, we self-engineer. So we have very fancy keyboard in the booth, computer outside, shortcuts for play, stop, record, rewind, whatever. And you just punch roll. So you hit record, you start reading, you make a mistake, you rewind. When you get to the right moment, you hit record again, and you keep going. And by the time you've done like a track of 60 minutes, there are technically no flaws.
Because you've recorded over the flaws.
Exactly.
I know Mary Robinette, who's a good friend of mine. She prefers to use a producer, even though she's done this for many years, to be like, stop, and then they'll rewind it and get it to the point. You just do all that yourself.
We've been doing it enough years. I think part of it, going back to the very beginning, because we had a whole bunch of experience listening to people and a variety of material, part of when you're reading the book to pre-read it, it's you get a sense of, oh, what is the author trying to do and how are they trying to do it? Because that becomes, discovering the narrative voice is probably the biggest challenge. The character voices sometimes are very easy, but the narrative voice is challenging because it's like, what is the author trying to do with that narrative voice? And that's not something an actor necessarily understands intuitively. We're more like, okay, that's not a physical thing in the sense that, okay, it's the maid, it's the captain, it's the soldier, it's the whatever. It's the how does the narrative voice function almost like a camera where it zooms in, it zooms out. It might be a slow fade, it might be a quick cut. Those are things that you're figuring out as you're reading it. But when you're exposed to all that variety of material, you get a better sense of, oh, this is what this author is doing. This is what this author is doing. And that's why being a reader yourself is so important as a narrator. You have to be, I encourage anybody who wants to get into the industry, read a variety of material because, like your work, there are a whole range of genres and styles that you're putting into this piece, and I need to know when to go for, okay, this is the pastiche piece, this is the
it's like a mixing board.
Right.
No, I've heard that. When you do Stormlight, it sounds, even the characters that aren't as regal, all of it sounds more regal. You're shooting for this big, larger than life epic, and the whole thing is a little different from when you read Wax and Wayne, right? Where it's it's more jovial, if that makes sense.
Well, you had the broadsheets.
Yeah, the broadsheets.
So that was a big clue. Oh, okay. So we're in the world of yellow journalism and sensationalism and all of that. And so it's like, okay, go with it.
My favorite character voices from the two of you are both going to come from Wheel of Time because I listened to so much of that. I would say you're going to be surprised with this. It's your Iturralde. I don't know if you remember him, but he's a captain, a general captain, and you have a clipped, almost nautical captain way of speaking with him that it's like a bark, and it wakes me up. And you, it's Moiraine, right? I mean, I kind of associate Moiraine with your voice to kind of an extent that it took me even a little bit of time to get used to Rosamund, even though she's a very perfect casting. Yeah. And so it's those are my favorites. I love when you do Wayne. I love,
so do I.
And I started throwing loops at you and seeing.
Yeah,
what
you did.
Do,
you really did. Book 2 especially.
Yep, I did my best to trip you up. Though in Stormlight, I think it is the more regal characters because of that tone. So your Dalinar or your Jasnah, even though we don't get a lot of Jasnah viewpoint, are the ones that just really stand out to me when I hit them. What are your favorite characters to read? Do you even think of it that way?
I mean, for me, it's kind of they're all my babies.
Yeah, that's how it is when people ask me what books I like to write of mine. What's your favorite? I'm like, how do I pick my
The one
children?
I'm doing now.
Yeah,
exactly.
The one I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And what's so great about the range of characters in Stormlight Archives is the human, not human.
Yeah.
Living, maybe not living.
Yes.
A thing, an abstract idea.
You do a very good job with the things.
How do you, voicing those, but it's the same process, right? You find the voice of a character by reading what the author has written to explain the character to you, picking it up, embodying it, and that's the voice. Whatever comes out when you embody, that's the voice. And so it's the same process for the things, except you get to tweak the corners and maybe tie them in a knot and throw them over your shoulder. And it's a lot of fun because they don't have to sound normal. They don't have to sound human. They don't have to sound red-blooded, They can sound like that.
Yeah, I think the most satisfying thing is when you know that you've discovered or created that the voice is right for that character. You just, it's like hitting a driver off the tee where it's butter. Mm-hmm. I mean, all you want to do is just keep doing that because it's so much fun, and you know, because time stops. Time does stop when you're in that zone. It's like, yes, you could do that, you know, a dialogue between whoever's talking. If you've got both of those voices going right, that could be 100 pages and you wouldn't care. Mm-hmm. And then the next chapter might be two other, and if you get them right, mm-hmm. It's just such a comfortable feeling because you know that, yeah, you're in that zone where you're telling the story, and that's the job, is to tell the story.
You know, I think I'll leave us there with a comment to the viewer. If you like the audiobooks, go listen to what we're going to be doing here, where we're going to be filming a few shorts and other things of these two reading, because one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had in my life was meeting you two for the first time, sitting down and chatting, and then having you get up and start speaking the character voices. And I was like that moment of, hey, them, and now the characters in my head, because I'd always imagined them as you're saying them. And so there's these wonderful people I've just met who suddenly transform into the characters but look the same. It's so interesting. So go catch some of that material. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is wonderful.